5:21 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The Russian submarine Kazan moved silently through the deep. Commander Arkady Volkov stood at the center of the control room and stared at a message that had just arrived via the extremely low-frequency antenna. It was a verified order to engage and destroy the American submarine, the U.S.S. Delaware. This was not a drill. The authentication codes matched the daily cipher perfectly. Today was supposed to be a routine patrol near the edge of the Arctic shelf. But the digital screen on the command console told a different story. It was a story of sudden and total war. The air inside the Kazan was thick, with the scent of recycled oxygen and machine oil. At 500 meters below the surface, the ocean was a world of absolute darkness and crushing pressure. The hull groaned occasionally as the temperature of the water shifted. To the crew, it was the sound of safety. To Volkov, it now felt like a coffin. He looked at his first officer, Captain Second-Rank Dmitriev. The man was holding a small metal briefcase. Inside were the physical keys required to arm the ship's hypersonic missiles. 5:23 in the morning. The command center was bathed in a dim red light to preserve the night vision of the crew. Volkov took the message printout and held it under a small lamp. He read the words again. Target designation was the U.S.S. Delaware. Weapon of choice was the 3M-22 Zircon missile. The order was signed by the Northern Fleet Command and verified by the General Staff in Moscow. There was no context. There was no mention of a diplomatic breakdown or a border skirmish. There was only the command to kill. Dmitriev spoke in a low voice. The codes are authenticated. The political officer is waiting in the torpedo room. We are required to acknowledge receipt of the order immediately. Volkov did not answer. He was thinking about the U.S.S. Delaware. He had been tracking the American vessel for 4 hours. It was a Virginia-class submarine, and it was currently positioned 30 miles to the northwest. Both ships were playing a game of cat and mouse that had lasted for decades. Usually, it ended with a quiet withdrawal. Now, the rules had changed. Volkov felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He was a professional. He had spent 20 years preparing for this exact moment. Yet, the silence of the ocean felt heavier than it had 5 minutes ago. 5:25 in the morning. The sonar operator looked up from his display. His face was pale in the green glow of the radar screen. He reported that the U.S.S. Delaware was maintaining its course and speed. The Americans did not know they were being watched. They did not know that the Kazan was preparing to open its missile hatches. Volkov looked at the weapon control station. The system was waiting for his input. Once he entered his personal authorization code, the automated sequence would begin. The Zircon missile would reach its target in less than 3 minutes. There would be no time for the Americans to react. Volkov turned to his first officer. We will confirm the order, but we will not arm the warheads until I have manually verified the tactical situation. Tell the engine room to maintain silent running. We are going to get closer. The first officer nodded and moved to the internal communications station. The crew began to move with a quiet, practiced urgency. They were the best of the Russian Navy. They did not ask questions, they followed orders. But the tension in the room was rising. Everyone knew that a flash priority message only came when the world was ending. Volkov sat in his command chair and gripped the armrests. He had to decide if he would be the man to pull the trigger. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 5:28 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The U.S.S. Delaware glided through the deep Arctic water. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was cool and smelled of static electricity. Commander Robert Miller stood behind the sonar station and watched the waterfall display. He had been a submariner for 22 years. He knew the sounds of the ocean. He also knew the sound of a predator. Chief Petty Officer Holloway sat at the sonar console. He was wearing heavy headphones. He adjusted a dial and leaned forward. His eyes were fixed on a faint green line on the screen. The line represented the Kazan. Holloway spoke first. Commander, contact Sierra 1 just gave us a transient. Miller leaned in closer. Classify it, Chief. Holloway shook his head. It was metal on metal. High frequency. It sounded like an outer hatch door opening. 5:30 in the morning. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. An outer hatch door opening on a Russian submarine was not a routine maneuver. It was a prerequisite for a launch. Miller looked at his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Vance. She was already looking at the tactical plot. Vance spoke clearly. The Kazan is 30 miles out. If they are opening doors, they are preparing for a strike. But there has been no radar painting, no active sonar. They are trying to stay dark. Miller gripped the edge of the console. Are we sure about the transient? Holloway nodded. Confirmed. It was the forward tubes, 1 through 4. 5:31 in the morning. Miller knew the math. A Zircon missile would cover 30 miles in less than 2 minutes. If the Kazan fired now, the Delaware would have almost no time to react. They are in a shallow part of the Barents Sea. There was nowhere to hide. Miller spoke to the room. Rig for ultra quiet. I want every non-essential system shut down. If they are hunting us, I do not want to give them a target. The helmsman responded. Rigging for ultra quiet. Aye, sir. The lights in the Delaware shifted to a deep blue. The hum of the ventilation died down. The only sound was the faint pings of the internal systems. Miller turned back to Vance. Check with Fleet Command. I want to know if there is a diplomatic crisis we missed. Vance moved to the communications station. The satellite link is active. I want to know why a Russian submarine is opening its doors in the middle of a peaceful morning. But we are at depth. It will take 2 minutes to get a burst through the float. 5:33 in the morning. The minutes felt like hours. Every man and woman in the Combat Information Center was frozen. They were listening to the ocean through the sonar ears of the ship. They were waiting for the sound of a missile clearing the water. Holloway gasped. Commander, new contact. Sierra 2. It is a second transient. The Kazan is turning. They are coming to a new heading. They are pointing their nose directly at us. Miller felt a chill. This was not a coincidence. This was an intercept. The Kazan was not just patrolling the Arctic, it was hunting the Delaware. And based on the sound of those hatches, the hunt was about to end in a kill. Miller spoke into his headset. Battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. The alarm began to wail through the decks of the American submarine. The quiet morning was over. The two most powerful machines on Earth were now locked in a terminal dance. 5:35 in the morning. The Barents Sea. Inside the Kazan, the silence was broken by the sharp click of boots on the metal deck. Captain First Rank Morozov, the political officer, stepped into the red light of the command center. He carried a second key on a chain around his neck. In the Russian Navy, the political officer was the final safeguard. He was there to ensure that orders from Moscow were carried out without hesitation. Morozov looked at the digital display. Commander Volkov, why are we not at launch depth? The order specified an immediate engagement. Volkov did not look away from the sonar screen. The U.S.S. Delaware has rigged for ultra quiet. If I surface to launch depth now, I give away my position before the missile leaves the tube. I am moving us into the inner circle. We will fire from 15 miles. At that range, their defense systems will have zero reaction time. Morozov leaned over the console. His voice was a cold whisper. The General Staff does not issue flash priority orders for tactical experiments. They issue them because the motherland is at risk. Every second you wait is a second the Americans have to find us. 5:38 in the morning. 30 miles away, the U.S.S. Delaware was a ghost in the water. Commander Miller stood in the center of the Combat Information Center. He was looking at the Rules of Engagement manual on a digital tablet. The text was clear. He could not fire unless he confirmed an overt hostile act. Lieutenant Commander Vance approached him. Sir, we have a problem. The Kazan is accelerating. They are no longer trying to hide their transit. They are charging our position. If they get inside 20 miles, we lose our tactical advantage. Miller looked at the sonar waterfall. Have they illuminated us with radar? Is there any active sonar pinging? Vance shook her head. Negative. They are coming in cold and fast. It is a classic intercept profile. They are trying to reach the launch basket. Miller knew the danger. In the world of submarine warfare, the first ship to fire usually won. In the world of submarine warfare, the first ship to fire usually won. But if he fired first without proof of a threat, he would be starting a nuclear war on a hunch. He was trapped between protocol and survival. 5:40 in the morning. Increase speed to 15 knots, Miller ordered. Change depth to 200 meters. I want to see if they follow our vertical move. If they mirror us, it is a confirmed hunt. The Delaware began to dive. The crew felt the slight tilt of the floor. In the engine room, the nuclear reactor hummed with increased power. The American submarine was trying to break the contact, but the ocean was too small for two giants. 5:41 in the morning. Back on the Kazan, the sonar operator shouted, "Target is diving. They are increasing speed. They know we are coming." Morozov stepped closer to Volkov. "They are preparing to evade. You have lost the element of surprise. Arm the weapons now, Commander. That is an order from the state." Volkov felt the weight of the key in his pocket. He looked at the tactical plot. The two submarines were now less than 25 miles apart. They were entering the danger zone where mistakes were fatal and hesitation was a death sentence. "Arm the forward tubes," Volkov said. His voice was flat. "Tell the weapons officer to begin the final targeting solution, but we do not fire until I give the verbal command." The room went silent as the computer began to calculate the flight path of the Zircon missile. Then, a new sound filled the room. It was a high-pitched metallic scream. It was not coming from their ship. It was coming from the water. The sonar operator froze. "Commander, we have a high-frequency pulse. Someone just hit us with active sonar." 5:45 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The active sonar pulse from the American submarine hit the hull of the Kazan with a sharp metallic ring. It was a declaration of intent. In the silent world of the deep, an active ping was the equivalent of a soldier chambering around in a dark room. The Americans knew exactly where the Kazan was. They were no longer hiding. Inside the Russian command center, the sonar operator adjusted his headset and winced. "Commander, the Delaware is pinging us continuously. They are establishing a fire control solution. They have our range. They have our bearing." Captain First Rank Morozov did not wait for Volkov to speak. He stepped to the weapons console and inserted his command key into the secondary slot. The red light on the panel began to blink. "They are targeting us, Volkov. The Americans are preparing to fire. If you do not execute the order now, you are committing treason against the crew. You are letting us die without a fight." Volkov looked at the blinking red light. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew the protocol. The active ping was a hostile act. Under the standard rules of engagement, he had every right to defend his ship. Combined with the flash priority order from Moscow, the logic for a strike was now absolute. 5:48 in the morning. "Enter the coordinates," Volkov said. His voice was thick. "Target is the U.S.S. Delaware. Range, 22 miles. Depth, 200 meters." The weapons officer began to type. On the status board, the 3M-22 Zircon missile system shifted from standby to active. Deep in the forward section of the Kazan, the massive vertical launch tubes began to flood with seawater. It was a loud, heavy sound that vibrated through the deck plates. The guidance system began its final alignment with the ship's inertial navigation unit. Dmitriev, the first officer, watched the screen. "Guidance is locked. The missile is seeing the target. We are 60 seconds from a warm launch." Volkov looked at the political officer. Morozov's hand was white as he gripped the key. The man was not a sailor. He was a bureaucrat who had spent his life waiting for this moment of ideological triumph. To him, the Delaware was not a ship full of people. It was a symbol to be erased. 5:50 in the morning. "Final authorization," Morozov whispered. "Do it, Volkov." The commander leaned over the console. He looked at the screen. The Zircon missile was a weapon of incredible violence. Once it cleared the water, its scramjet engine would ignite. It would accelerate to Mach 8. At that speed, the kinetic energy alone could snap a submarine in half. There would be no survivors. There would be no time for a distress call. Volkov reached for the ignition panel. He looked at his own reflection in the glass of the display. He saw a man who was about to start a war that might burn the world to a cinder. He thought about the order again. It was too perfect. It was too clean. Why was there no secondary confirmation from the fleet? Why was the radio silent, except for the command to kill? "Wait," Volkov said. Morozov turned on him. "The window is opening." If you wait, they will fire first." "I said wait," Volkov roared. "Something is wrong. We are at the edge of the inner circle. If they were going to fire, they would have launched the moment they got the active return. They are holding their fire." "Why?" Behind them, the sonar operator shouted again. "Commander, multiple transients. The Delaware is opening its torpedo tube shutters. They are not firing missiles. They are preparing a heavyweight spread." The two predators were now standing chest to chest. Both had their fingers on the trigger. The morning was no longer quiet. It was screaming with the sound of impending death. 5:52 in the morning. The Barents Sea. On the American submarine, the sound of the Kazan flooding its launch tubes was unmistakable. It was a heavy, rushing noise that traveled through the cold water like a physical blow. In the Combat Information Center of the U.S.S. Delaware, the tension had reached a breaking point. Commander Miller looked at the tactical display. The Kazan was now only 18 miles away. "Status on the torpedoes," Miller said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were fixed on the sonar return. Lieutenant Commander Vance responded immediately. "Tubes 1 through 4 are flooded. Outer doors are open. The Mark 48 advanced capability torpedoes are enabled. We have a solid acoustic lock. We are waiting for your command to release." Miller knew the stakes. If he fired now, his torpedoes would reach the Kazan in less than 5 minutes. But if the Kazan fired its Zircon missiles, they would reach the Delaware in 90 seconds. It was a math problem where the wrong answer meant the end of everything. "They are waiting for something," Miller whispered. "They have the lock. They have the tubes open. Why have they not fired?" 5:54 in the morning. Inside the Kazan, the weapons officer turned his chair to face Volkov. "Commander, the 3M22 Zircon Seeker is active. The missile has a positive identification on the Delaware. All systems are green." The political officer, Morozov, reached out and touched the launch button. He did not press it, but his finger hovered just millimeters above the glass. "You are hesitating, Volkov. The Americans have their torpedoes in the water. I can hear the high-speed screws on the sonar." Volkov looked at the sonar display. Morozov was right. The sound of the American torpedoes was a high-pitched whine, but it was not the sound of a launch. It was the sound of the torpedoes being warmed up in the tubes. The Americans were matching his move. They were showing him their teeth, but they had not bitten yet. "They are not in the water," Volkov said. "They are spinning up. It is a warning. They are telling us they see us." "It is a trap," Morozov countered. "They want us to wait so they can kill us in the dark. Press the button. For the motherland. Press it now." 5:57 in the morning. The two submarines were now separated by only 15 miles of dark water. On both ships, every man and woman was at their station. In the engine rooms, the technicians watched the pressure gauges. In the torpedo rooms, the loaders stood ready with secondary rounds. Volkov felt a strange clarity. He looked at the flash priority message one last time. It was perfect. The codes were correct. The format was exact. But there was no soul in it. A command to start a nuclear war should come with a voice. It should come with a reason. "Commander," the first officer said, "the American sonar has shifted to a high-frequency continuous wave. They are about to launch. We are out of time." Volkov looked at the red launch panel. He looked at the political officer, who was shaking with anticipation. Then he looked at the clock. The window of opportunity for a surprise strike was closing. In 60 seconds, the tactical advantage would vanish. "Enter the final authorization," Volkov said. The first officer typed the code. The system chimed. The words "ready to launch" appeared on every screen in the control room. The Kazan was now a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the American Navy. The window was open. The world was about to fall through it. 5:59 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The interior of the Kazan was a pressure cooker of red light and heavy breathing. On the weapons console, the final confirmation box was flashing. It was a bright, steady pulse of neon green. It was the only light that mattered. The 3M22 Zircon was ready to fly. The guidance computer had finished its last handshake with the satellite network. The coordinates for the U.S.S. Delaware were hard-coded into the missile's brain. Volkov felt the sweat stinging his eyes. He did not wipe it away. His right hand hovered over the launch trigger. To his left, Captain Morozov had his own key turned to the vertical position. The political officer was no longer speaking. He was staring at the screen with a look of pure, fanatical devotion. 20 seconds to the launch window, the weapons officer announced. His voice was brittle. 5:59 and 40 seconds in the morning. 30 miles away, the U.S.S. Delaware was screaming with activity. Commander Miller stood in the center of the Combat Information Center. He was watching the thermal signature of the Kazan through the high-frequency sonar. The Russian submarine was venting heat. The missile tubes were warming up. It was the unmistakable signature of a launch. "They are shooting," Chief Holloway yelled. "I have a massive thermal spike on Sierra 1. They are cycling the ignition sequence." Miller did not hesitate. Fire 1, Fire 2, snapshot. Give them something to think about. The Delaware shuddered as two Mark 48 torpedoes were shoved out of their tubes by high-pressure air. The sound was a dull thud, followed by the high-pitched whine of the torpedo turbines. The weapons were in the water. They were trailing thin copper wires back to the American submarine. They were hunting. 5:59 and 50 seconds in the morning. On the Kazan, the sonar operator recoiled. Incoming. 2 high-speed screws. Bearing 320. Range is 18 miles and closing fast. Time to impact is 4 minutes. Morozov turned his head toward Volkov. "Fire, you fool. Fire now or we are dead." Volkov looked at the trigger. He looked at the timer on the screen. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The entire history of the world seemed to narrow down to the tip of his finger. He saw the faces of his crew. He saw the face of the first officer. Everyone was waiting for the roar of the missile. They were waiting for the end of the world. 6 o'clock in the morning, the timer hit 0. The green box turned into a solid bar of light. The system was giving him the final go-ahead. The Zircon was waiting for the electrical pulse that would send it through the surface of the Arctic Ocean. The American torpedoes were racing through the dark. The Kazan was seconds away from being a tomb. Volkov's finger touched the cold plastic of the button. He felt the tension in the spring. He felt the weight of the order from Moscow. He felt the eyes of the political officer burning into the side of his head. 6 o'clock in the morning. The Barents Sea. Commander Volkov pulled his hand back from the launch trigger. He did not press the button. He did not issue the order to fire. Instead, he turned away from the weapons console and sat down in his command chair. His movements were slow and deliberate. He looked at the digital clock on the bulkhead. The green numbers ticked upward. 6 o'clock and 10 seconds. Captain Morozov screamed at him. "What are you doing? The American torpedoes are in the water. We are seconds from impact. Fire the missile." Volkov looked at the political officer with a gaze that was empty of fear. "No. If I fire that missile, the world ends. If I do not fire, only we die. I am choosing to wait. I am choosing to see if the Americans are as professional as we are." Morozov lunged for the console. Dmitriev, the first officer, stepped between them. He was a large man, and his hand rested on the holster of his sidearm. He did not speak. He simply stood his ground. The command center of the Kazan became a frozen tableau of red light and silent rebellion. 6 o'clock and 40 seconds. Inside the Combat Information Center of the U.S.S. Delaware, Commander Miller was staring at his own display. The 2 Mark 48 torpedoes were halfway to their target. They were screaming through the water at 55 knots, but there was no return fire. There was no missile launch from the Kazan. "They are not shooting," Lieutenant Commander Vance said. Her voice was a whisper. "Commander, why are they not shooting?" Miller felt a cold sweat on his neck. He had 2 weapons in the water. In 3 minutes, they would find the hull of the Kazan and tear it open. If the Russians were going to fire, they would have done it by now. The silence from the Kazan was more terrifying than a launch. It was the silence of a man who had decided to accept his own death. 6:0 to 2 in the morning. "Cut the wires," Miller ordered. Vance looked at him in shock. "Sir, if we cut the wires, the torpedoes will go into search mode. They will kill the Kazan automatically. I said, cut the wires and transmit a shutdown command. Miller roared. They are not firing. Do you hear me? They had the window, and they did not take it. I will not be the one to start this. Shut down the weapons. Now. Vance hit the override. On the sonar display, the two high-speed screws of the torpedoes slowed and then stopped. The weapons drifted into the dark, their propulsion systems killed by a remote signal. The Delaware was now defenseless, but the Kazan was still alive. 6:0 to 4 in the morning. On the Kazan, the sonar operator gasped. The incoming screws have stopped. The American torpedoes are dead in the water. They shut them down. Volkov did not move. He watched the clock. 6:0 to 4. 6:0 to 5. Inside the vertical launch tube, the 3M-22 Zircon missile was still active, but its internal thermal batteries were beginning to lose their peak charge. The automated launch window was a narrow corridor of time. If the missile was not fired within 6 minutes of final authorization, the guidance system would require a full reboot. 6:0 to 6 in the morning. The timer on the weapons console turned from green to amber. A low chime sounded through the command center. The word expired appeared across the targeting screen. The 6-minute window had closed. The Kazan could no longer fire a surprise strike. The threat was over. Volkov let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Morozov. The political officer was trembling, his face a mask of fury and confusion. Volkov ignored him and looked at his first officer. Tell the radio room to surface the buoy, Volkov said. I want a direct voice link to Moscow. I do not want a cipher. I want a human being on the other end of the line. And tell the Americans we are standing down. The red light in the Kazan seemed to soften. The immediate danger of a nuclear exchange had passed, but the mystery of the order remained. The ocean was still. 6:0 to 7 in the morning. The Barents Sea. Commander Miller watched the tactical plot inside the Combat Information Center of the U.S.S. Delaware. The red icon representing the Kazan had stopped its aggressive maneuvering. It was now drifting at 3 knots. It was the behavior of a ship that had surrendered its initiative. The high-stakes geometry of the last 10 minutes was dissolving into a state of confused static. Miller turned to Lieutenant Commander Vance. You are sure the torpedoes are inert? Vance checked her console. Confirmed. The shutdown command was received and acknowledged by both units. They are now ballast. They're sinking to the ocean floor. No active seekers. No danger of accidental detonation. Miller rubbed his face with both hands. He felt the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a hollow ache in his chest. He had us, Sarah. He had a clean fire control solution for 6 full minutes. He saw our tubes open. He saw the torpedoes in the water. Why did he sit on the trigger? Vance looked at the thermal history of the foreign military submarine. Maybe a system failure. Or maybe he is waiting for us to make the next move. We are sitting ducks right now, sir. We have no weapons in the tubes and we are still within the missile kill zone. No, Miller said. His voice was quiet. That was not a failure. That was a choice. He looked into the abyss, and he decided not to jump. I want to know what he knows. 6:0 to 9 in the morning. The atmosphere inside the foreign military submarine was cold. The political officer, Morozov, stood by the aft bulkhead. He was no longer shouting. He was staring at Volkov with a look of restrained, bureaucratic violence. Volkov had bypassed the direct chain of command. In the history of the foreign military navy, such an act of hesitation was often treated as a crime against the state. Volkov ignored the man. He looked at the communications officer. Report on the extremely low-frequency antenna. Do we have a signal? The communications officer was pressing his headset against his ear. His hands were shaking. Commander, signal is weak but steady. We are receiving a priority 1 burst. It is a secondary authentication code. It is... Wait. It is a flash override. The room went completely silent. Even Morozov leaned forward. The communications officer continued. The previous engagement order is marked as a technical error. A training injection was routed to the live operational network by mistake during a software update at military command. All units are ordered to disregard previous tactical instructions. We are to return to a state of routine patrol immediately. Dmitriev, the first officer, let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. A software update. They almost burned the world because of a line of code. 6:10 in the morning. The window of opportunity was officially dead. The tactical screens on the foreign military vessel shifted from red back to a neutral blue. The automated targeting systems began the long process of purging the coordinates for the naval warship from their memory banks. The hypersonic missile, once a harbinger of the end of days, was now just a silent piece of expensive machinery cooling in a dark tube. Volkov stood up. He felt older than he had 20 minutes ago. "Bring us to the surface," he ordered. "I want the satellite mast up. I want to speak to the Admiral of the fleet. And keep the armed personnel informed of our intent. We are not hunting anymore." Deep in the water, the two predators began to move apart. The distance between them grew, but the tension did not vanish. Both commanders knew that while the systems had failed, the humans had held. But they also knew that next time, the window might not stay open long enough for a man to think. 6:15 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The Kazan began its slow ascent from the crushing depths of the Arctic. Inside the command center, the sound of the ballast tanks blowing was a low and steady roar. Commander Volkov stood at the periscope station. He watched the depth gauge as the numbers scrolled downward. 300 meters, 200, 100. The pressure on the hull was easing, but the pressure inside the room remained absolute. Captain Morozov stood by the exit. He had not moved since the engagement window closed. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was no longer a part of the command team. He was a witness for the prosecution. Volkov knew that as soon as the satellite link was established, the political officer would file a report that could end his career, or his life. But Volkov did not care. He had seen the way the military force torpedoes had died in the water. That was the only validation he needed. 6:18 in the morning. The Kazan reached periscope depth. The multifunction mast broke the surface of the freezing water. It was a small gray needle in a vast desert of white caps and slate blue waves. The communications officer worked his console with frantic speed. He was searching for the encrypted military satellite network. "Link established," the officer announced. "Signal strength is 70%. I am opening a direct channel to Northern Fleet headquarters. I have the duty admiral on the line." Volkov took the handset. "This is Commander Volkov of the naval warship. I am reporting a critical technical anomaly. We received a flash priority engagement order against the naval warship at 5:21 this morning. I have delayed execution pending manual verification. Confirm status of the order. Over." There was a long pause. The static on the line was the only sound in the room. Then a voice came through. It was heavy and tired. "Naval warship. This is Fleet Command. We have been trying to reach you for 10 minutes. The order was a phantom. A high-level training scenario was accidentally injected into the live operational feed during a system-wide security patch. You are to stand down immediately. I repeat, stand down. Is the military force vessel still afloat? Over." Volkov closed his eyes for a second. "The military force vessel is afloat. We are disengaging. Over." 6:22 in the morning. 5 miles away, the naval warship was also at periscope depth. Commander Miller was in the radio room. He was listening to a burst transmission from the National Military Command Center. The message was being relayed through a military aircraft. Circling high above the clouds, Lieutenant Commander Vance read the transcript. "Sir, the Defense Headquarters has confirmed a massive technical glitch in the foreign military naval fleet's automated command system. They are calling it a ghost order. The military forces have reached out through the deconfliction hotline. They have apologized. They are asking us to maintain a safe distance while they recover their units." Miller leaned against the bulkhead. The adrenaline was gone now. In its place was a cold and hollow realization. A ghost order. We almost died because of a software patch. If that foreign commander had followed his training to the letter, we would be pieces of scrap metal on the seafloor right now, and our surviving ships would be launching a retaliatory strike. 6:25 in the morning. The two submarines sat on the surface of the Barents Sea. They were visible to each other now, two black shapes in a cold and indifferent ocean. The sun was finally beginning to break through the morning mist. It turned the water into a sheet of gray glass. Volkov stepped out onto the bridge of the foreign military vessel. The Arctic air was freezing. It burned his lungs, but it felt clean. He looked through his binoculars and saw the silhouette of the Delaware. He saw a man standing on the military bridge. He did not wave. He did not signal. He simply watched. The crisis was over. The immediate threat of a nuclear exchange had vanished as quickly as a bad dream. But as the foreign military vessel began to turn back toward its home port, Volkov knew that the mystery was not fully resolved. The order had been too perfect. The codes had been too clean. A technical error was a convenient explanation, but it did not explain everything. 7:10 in the morning. The Barents Sea, the U.S.S. Delaware, and the Kazan were now 4 miles apart. The sun had climbed higher, casting a cold, brilliant light across the whitecaps. On the bridge of the American submarine, Commander Miller watched the black hull of the foreign military vessel through his binoculars. The Kazan was low in the water, its massive sail cutting through the waves like a jagged tooth. There were no flags flying. There were no signals of victory or defeat. There was only the heavy, rhythmic sound of the Arctic Ocean. Miller lowered his binoculars. He felt the freezing wind bite into his skin, but he did not go below. He needed the air. He needed the physical reminder that the world was still turning. Behind him, the bridge watchstander waited in silence. The man's face was red from the cold, but his posture was rigid. "Secure from battle stations," Miller said. His voice was raspy. "Set the normal steaming watch. We are returning to our assigned patrol box at 10 knots." The order was repeated down the hatch. Within seconds, the frantic energy of the Combat Information Center began to dissolve. The sailors who had been prepared to die 10 minutes ago were now calculating their next sleep cycle. They were professional. They were trained to absorb trauma and return to the routine. But as Miller turned to descend the ladder, he looked back. One last time. The Kazan was beginning to vent steam. It was preparing to dive. 7:15 in the morning. Inside the Kazan, the mood was even darker. Commander Volkov stood at the foot of the ladder in the control room. The red battle lights had been replaced by the standard white overheads. The change in lighting made everyone look tired and old. Captain Morozov was gone. He had retreated to his cabin to begin the long process of writing his official report. The silence he left behind was filled with the hum of the air scrubbers and the faint clicking of the sonar consoles. Volkov looked at his first officer. Dmitriev was leaning against a chart table, his eyes closed. He looked like a man who had just finished a marathon. "Take us down," Volkov said quietly. "Depth, 100 meters. Course, 090. We are going home." The first officer opened his eyes and nodded. 100 meters. "Aye, Commander. We are going home." 7:30 in the morning. The two submarines vanished beneath the waves almost simultaneously. From the surface, there was no sign that the two most powerful weapons on the planet had nearly started a global catastrophe. The water smoothed over the spots where they had been, leaving only the endless, gray expanse of the Barents Sea. Below the surface, the Delaware and the Kazan were once again invisible. They resumed their roles as ghosts. The sonar operators returned to their screens, searching for the faint traces of propellers and hull pops. The tactical displays were clear. The weapons were secured in their tubes. The orders were logged and filed away. The smell of fresh coffee began to drift through the passageways. In the berthing area of the Kazan, off-duty sailors climbed into their bunks and stared at the overheads. There was no celebration. There were no speeches about heroism or the preservation of peace. There was only the quiet, heavy realization of what had nearly happened. The crisis had resolved not through a grand gesture, but through a series of small, human refusals. Two men, separated by miles of water and decades of ideology, had looked at, the same screen, and decided that the machine was wrong. They had chosen to trust their own judgment over the cold logic of a computer code. The morning was finally quiet. The world had survived the 6-minute window. But the silence felt fragile, like thin ice over a deep and hungry ocean. 3 hours later, Northern Fleet Headquarters, Severomorsk. Commander Volkov stood in a windowless room that smelled of stale tobacco and floor wax. He was no longer wearing his heavy sea jacket. He stood in his dress uniform, his back straight, facing a semicircle of 5 high-ranking officers. At the center sat Admiral Nikolaev, the commander of the Northern Fleet. To the admiral's left was a man in a dark suit, who did not have a name tag. He was from the state security apparatus. The admiral looked at a thick stack of printed logs. The data confirms your report, Volkov. The engagement order originated from the primary command node. It carried the correct digital signature of the general staff. To every automated system on the Kazan, that order was legitimate. Volkov kept his eyes fixed on the wall behind the admiral. The order was legitimate, but the tactical reality was not. There was no provocation. There was no declaration of state emergency. I chose to wait for human confirmation. The man in the dark suit leaned forward. His voice was quiet and sharp. You chose to ignore a flash priority order during a period of high international tension. You allowed an American submarine to target a Russian vessel without a counterstrike. In any other era, that would be called cowardice. Volkov turned his gaze to the man. In any other era, we would not be using a computer network that can be tricked by its own updates. I did not ignore the order. I evaluated it. The order was a ghost. The crew is alive. The ship is intact. And we are not at war. The admiral held up a hand to silence the security officer. The investigation is ongoing. Preliminary findings suggest a catastrophic failure in the automated scheduling system. A simulated attack from a training exercise was somehow tagged as a live operational requirement. It was a phantom in the machine. You will remain on shore leave until the board makes a final determination. 6 hours later, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Commander Miller sat in a secure briefing room. He was patched into a video conference with the Defense Headquarters facility and the National Security Council. The room was filled with the low hum of cooling fans. On the large screen, a 4-star general was pointing at a map of the Barents Sea. The general spoke through the speakers. The foreign military have provided a full technical disclosure via the hotline. They admit the error was on their end. Their system glitched. But they are also pointing out that you fired 2 torpedoes at one of their capital ships in international waters. Miller did not blink. I fired to defend my ship and my crew. The Kazan was flooding its tubes. It was a clear hostile act. If I had waited any longer, we would be dead. I shut down the weapons the moment I saw they were not following through with their strike. You took a massive risk, Commander, a voice from the State Department said. If those torpedoes had hit, the foreign government would not be talking about software errors. They would be talking about an act of war. Miller leaned toward the microphone. The risk was already there. It was built into the system the moment we decided to let computers handle the authentication of nuclear strikes. The foreign commander and I were the only ones in that ocean who knew what was actually happening. The technology failed us both. The humans were the only things that worked. 3 days later, the Defense Headquarters facility and the Kremlin. The Volkov hesitation was already being studied by military analysts on both sides of the Atlantic. It became a case study in tactical restraint. The official reports called it a technical anomaly, but the classified files told a different story. They spoke of a 6-minute window where the fate of the world rested on the shoulders of 2 men who had never met. The strategic assessment was grim. The incident proved that the speed of modern warfare had outpaced the speed of human diplomacy. If the foreign vessel had been 10 miles closer, or if Miller had been 10 seconds faster, the outcome would have been irreversible. The machines had done exactly what they were programmed to do. They had identified a target and prepared to kill it. The fallout was quiet but deep. Weapons protocols were revised. The hotline was upgraded with new layers of human verification. But the tension in the Arctic did not go away. The submarines returned to the deep. The hunt continued. The only thing that had changed was the realization that the next ghost in the machine might not find a man like Volkov at the controls. 1 month later, the Pentagon, and the Kremlin. The official inquiry was closed. The files were marked top secret and moved to a vault where they would remain for 50 years. The public was told that a routine naval exercise had concluded successfully. There was no mention of the hypersonic missile that had been seconds from ignition. There was no mention of the military vessel torpedoes that had been hunting a foreign military hull in the dark. The world continued to turn, unaware of how close it had come to a full-scale nuclear exchange. Strategic analysts would later call the incident the Volkov hesitation. It became a required study at every naval academy in the world. The lesson was simple but profound. In an age of artificial intelligence and automated kill chains, the human element is the only true failsafe. When the machines are programmed to escalate, only a human can choose to stop. In the technical post-mortem, experts identified the exact moment the ghost order was generated. It was 5:21 in the morning. A routine diagnostic of the global command and control network had triggered a failover protocol. Because the systems were designed to operate at light speed, the error propagated through the entire fleet in less than 1 second. By the time a human operator noticed the glitch, the military vessel had already received the command to kill. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had prepared for war with perfect efficiency. The technology of the 21st century is designed to remove the burden of decision from the operator. It is designed to be faster than human thought. But speed is a double-edged sword. When the machine makes a mistake at Mach 8, there is no time for a committee to meet. There is only the man on the spot. Commander Volkov and Commander Miller represented the last line of defense against a mathematical error. They did not win a battle. They did not sink a ship, but they prevented a catastrophe that would have redefined the map of the world. They proved that the most sophisticated sensor in the ocean is still the human conscience. Volkov looked at the perfect data and he saw a lie. He chose to trust his intuition over his instruments. The foreign military navy eventually promoted Volkov to a higher rank before his retirement. It was a quiet acknowledgement that his restraint had saved the Northern Fleet from a war that no one wanted. Miller continued to serve with distinction. Both men carried the weight of those 6 minutes for the rest of their lives. They were the only ones who knew exactly how thin the ice really was. As the Kazan and the Delaware returned to their respective bases, the engineers went to work. They promised that the software was now perfect. They promised that the ciphers were unbreakable. They spoke of a future where war would be clean and logical and free from human error. They claimed the new safeguards were foolproof. But the ocean remains a dark and unpredictable place. Beneath the ice and the waves, the game continues. Other commanders are out there, right now. They are watching their screens. They are listening to the pings. They are waiting for an order that might change everything. They are operating in a world where a single line of code can override decades of diplomacy. The lesson of the 6-minute window is that peace is not a natural state. It is a choice that must be made every single day. It is a choice made by professionals who understand that the most powerful weapon in their arsenal is the one they decide not to use. It is the victory of the man over the machine. The Barents Sea is silent once more. The currents move the cold water over the point, wrecks of ancient ships and the ghosts of past wars. But in the halls of power, the question remains. Who will be at the controls the next time the machine tells a lie? And will they have the courage to sit still for 6 minutes while the world waits to burn?